privacy is not secrecy. It's not this idea that you're not going to share anything with the world. It's this idea that you and you alone can choose what you want to share with the world. And I think that's fundamental for a free society. The way Bitcoin is designed is some people mistakenly think that it's private by default. In reality, if you look at it, it's like 95%, 96% of people that are coming into Bitcoin are doing it in a way that adds them to a list with their transaction history is very troubling. We could continue to pump and Bitcoin price appreciates. It creates this like dopamine hit. So like while the frog is boiling, the frog is also ecstatic that their bags are pumping and they just are distracted. The price going up is a tranquilizer while the selective attacks and the friction just keep coming.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. In this episode, I spoke with Matt Odell. Odell is a Bitcoin and privacy technology advocate. He's a managing partner at 1031. He's on the board of directors of the OpenSats Foundation and is a regular voice on various podcasts, most notably his own podcast, Citadel Dispatch and the Rabbit Hole Recap with Marty Bent. So I've known about Odell for quite a long time, and I always thought that Odell really stood out as someone who was always willing to say what he really thought and not just kind of fall in line with the crowd. And I've always trusted Odell to give a take which is reasoned and honest and in the service of what he genuinely believes to be right. And after getting to know Odell more personally over the past couple of years, I really think that he embodies and lives by a mantra which he has coined, stay humble and stack sats. He's definitely a humble guy, but he works very hard in the background. He's always been super respectful to me, and he has a very good reputation amongst open source developers that he really advocates for. So it really was a pleasure to get him on the podcast. So this conversation was very Bitcoin focused and certainly went more into the technical aspects of Bitcoin than I normally do on this podcast. But even if you're not an avid Bitcoiner, I definitely think there's a lot to take away from this conversation generally. So I hope you guys enjoy it. If you do enjoy the episode, make sure you give it a like and a share on social media. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, make sure you give it a 5-star rating in whichever podcast app you're using. If you're new here, welcome. Make sure you give the pod a subscribe for future episodes. Finally, if you're not listening on the Fountain app already, definitely recommend you check it out over there. You can stream sats as you listen, which will help support the show, and you can leave me a boost with a comment, like these boosts, which I received on my last episode. The first is from Kirk, who boosted 513 sats, saying, "I love the thoughtfulness of your pod, and yes, taxation is extortion." Thank you for that boost, Kirk, and I'm really glad that you're getting value from the podcast. God's Death boosted 237 sats with the message thank you. Thank you as well, God's Death. And a second one here from God's Death, boosting 537 sats with the message rules without rulers. That's what it's about, God's Death. I hope that I did manage to articulate out that point in my last ramble about taxation and ethics. All right, that's enough for the intro. For those of you who haven't boosted yet, or for those of you who are already boosting, I really encourage you to boost on this episode specifically, and you'll find out the reason for that at the end of the show. All right, onto the episode with Matt Odell. All right, Matt Odell, welcome to the podcast. It's awesome to have you on. It's definitely been a long time coming, having this conversation. You know, we've known each other a little while now. So yeah, I'm excited to get into some topics with you. So how's things going, dude?
Likewise, thanks for having me. It's going well over here.
Nice. Well, I'll just give like a little bit of a brief introduction for those who haven't heard of you, who are listening to my podcast and maybe they haven't heard your name. I guess like in the Bitcoin community, I would say that you're someone who is like, you're an influencer pleb. Like you're an influencer, you know, people know your name, like you have a big voice in the community, but I think that you definitely resonate a lot with average Bitcoiners out there. You know, generally I think that your views, like people take them seriously and you're willing to kind of call stuff out for how it is. So that's kind of how I know you. Obviously you've also got your involvement with 1031, that you're a managing partner over there. Doing kind of like investments in Bitcoin companies and all the rest of it. You're also a board member on for OpenSats, which I'm sure we can get into a bit later in the conversation as well. And you've got your own podcast, the Citadel Dispatch podcast, and also Rabbit Hole Recap with Marty Bent, which a lot of people will know of those. So that's kind of my brief introduction. If you want to just kind of elaborate on that for my listeners.
I mean, I think you nailed it.
I got it covered.
You know, I don't like focusing on things that other people are doing. If someone's doing something well, I'd rather them just do it. So I try and, you know, focus my life on the places where I see there's pain points and that I think I can do it better than other people. And I like to challenge other people to try and do it better than me. On the influencer side, like I'm kind of like, I have warring angels in my head. I speak up because I feel like other people don't speak up, but I'd rather kind of just be in the background. I don't really, I recently deleted my Twitter account. Like I don't want to be the main character. That's just not, I don't think that's like a good way to live a fulfilled life. Like I just want to focus on my family and what's important. On the professional side, I mean, we got the 2 podcasts, Rabbit Hole Recap we've been doing for 5.5 years every week, weekly news show on Bitcoin. Citadel Dispatch is more education focused. Co-founder of OpenSats, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. And 1031, I think, I've historically, if you've listened to me for the many years that I've been a public individual, I just really have always been disappointed with VCs that operate in the Bitcoin space and operate outside of the Bitcoin space. I don't think investing is something that is inherently evil. I don't think making money is inherently evil, but I think a lot of incentives result in funds and the founders that they invest in taking shortcuts and not really trying to operate in an ethical fashion. And I think there's an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity for ethical investment. I think where you actually make money, but also the world is better than you left it afterwards. And I think 1031 is kind of a culmination of that concept. And it's not without its trials and tribulations. Like we're improving over time, but I think we're doing a really great job over there.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it sounds like everything you're doing is definitely like very purpose driven. And I think that that's something that makes you stand out from other people, is that you are kind of, you're calling things as you see it. And I think that's what people want. Like, that's kind of why I think Bitcoin has such a, like the pleb community. And I know that word is like, I know you don't like that word specifically, but like, that kind of community of people who is just like on the ground, doing the thing, stacking sats, kind of caring about the mission and all the rest of it, but not necessarily out there kind of broadcasting himself and stuff. I think it is good for people to kind of have someone in the community who is maybe on a bigger stage, but actually kind of reflects those views. Because yeah, like you said, I think there's a lot of people who don't, and who kind of like, they, I guess, curb their message or kind of just water things down in order to kind of like maintain that standing. Because, when you've got a big voice, like speaking up kind of comes at more risk, right? It's not a risk if you're just some anon with a whatever, like an avatar on Twitter or something. But if you do have a big voice, there's more of a risk there. So, props to you for doing all that. I just want to go back into like your past. I know that like some people get tired of telling their like Bitcoin origin story. So be as brief as you want here, but like, I've never heard your Bitcoin origin story. I literally have no idea how you got into it, why you got into it, and all the rest of it. So do you mind giving us the kind of TLDR there?
I mean, it used to be that every Bitcoin podcast started with, so tell me, what is your Bitcoin origin story?
Yeah.
So I have told it many times.
Mine still does.
I have told it many times, but it has been a few years because I'm a bit of a private individual, and I try not to air all my personal things out there. But
sure.
I was a young man, right? I grew up during, I witnessed the 2008 financial crisis, right? And I was like, okay, there's no adults in the room. We can't trust the banks. You can't trust the CNBC talking heads. No one has any idea what the hell's going on. We're in, new waters. Like we've never been in this type of situation in history. History tends to rhyme, and has, you can learn a lot from history, but we are, in a new age, and we have a new monetary system and this crazy financial house of cards, and really nobody has any idea what's going on. So that was 2008. And at that point, I was like, okay, we can't trust the banks, but at least, we have these up and coming US-based tech companies that are vowing not to be evil and have our backs, and they're innovating. And tech, I've always been fascinated by tech and always wanted, the newest gadgets and get technical with things and learn how to use them. And then 2013 came around, and Bitcoin was already on my radar at that point. But then the 2013 Snowden leaks happened, and I was like, fuck, okay, we can't trust the big tech companies. We need open source software, and we need free and open source software. And to me, like, Bitcoin was the culmination of those two things as I was growing up, where we can't trust our institutions. No one has any idea what's going on. Freedom tech is the solution. That is the hope. That is the optimism, right? I was like a little bit of a disenfranchised youth at that point. And Bitcoin and the open source community, both around it and within it, gave me that hope. And then from that point on, I was just wanted to learn more, just constantly. I love getting my hands dirty. But I still thought like Bitcoin might be banned in the United States, like just straight up, just like illegal. So I had, pretty phenomenal, and not Satoshi level, obviously. No one has Satoshi level OPSEC, but I had pretty good privacy practices. I was like rotating NIMs, like I was, an anon pleb. And then we had the 2017 block size war. And the influencers were failing us. There was, everyone was just out for a quick buck. Very few people were acting ethically, a lot of hypocrites. And at the same time, so I started to get more outspoken. But I was still like pretty reserved and like no one saw my face or anything like that. And then Trump upset Hillary Clinton. And at that point, I was like, okay, like, I don't think like Trump is necessarily pro-Bitcoin. I just think Hillary is anti-Bitcoin and Trump is distracted with a bunch of other things. So, at that point, I like took the leap and I was like, okay, let's just fucking do this thing. And I came into Bitcoin full time, left my fiat job and started trying to piece together like ethical ways to make money in the space while also pushing forward the movement. And yeah, the rest is kind of history.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I guess just really briefly on that one, like, how did you find that experience going from working into a job that you didn't necessarily feel like you were, how do you word it? Like, it wasn't necessarily your, the thing that you wanted to do in your life, that it wasn't necessarily something you were building towards that meant everything. And then kind of switching into Bitcoin, which is a very purpose-driven industry. Like, how was that switch for you?
I will say the positive is that I'm my work is things that I find fulfilling and enjoy doing. Mm-hmm. The negative is it's much more difficult to make money ethically in the Bitcoin space than it is to just like work a fiat job and stack sats. And then the secondary negative is I think there's a real advantage to, like, if you don't work in the space, there's a real advantage that you can just turn everything off. During a bear market, first of all, your salary is not correlated. Like your income streams aren't correlated to the asset you hold the majority of your wealth in and you're trying to accumulate, right? Like during Bitcoin bear markets where it's the best time to stack, like income starts to dry up if you're in Bitcoin full time. And then secondary, like it's just really nice for mental well-being to just be able to, turn off Twitter, not follow what's going on, and just quietly stack and like focus on your life, during the 2 years of a bear market. And I haven't been able to do that for about 6 years. Like I'm just always, like my waking hours are just consumed by Bitcoin. So it takes a little bit more of, a little bit. There's a greater mental and economic burden, I guess I would say, but it's way more fulfilling. Like I know like most people in my age range, in our age range, like it's very like most people just hate their jobs, and I do love what I do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. All right, I'm gonna get into some of these some of these topics. I've got a bunch here, and I hope we have time to get through them all. But let's see. I'm going to start with Bitcoin privacy because this is first of all, probably the biggest talking issue right now in Bitcoin. And also I would say it's probably the thing that's most in your area and something that, you talk about as a privacy advocate. So we've recently had the Samurai Wallet founders arrested and charged with money laundering. I think literally a day ago or 2 days ago, the Tornado Cash founder, who was, creating privacy software for Ethereum, was sentenced to 64 months in prison. How do you feel generally about the current state of privacy? And, we seem to have seen the government make some very kind of firm strides lately when it comes to going to war against privacy. And I just want to know your general thoughts about, I guess, first of all, those two specific incidents, but also just more generally as well.
First of all, I always like to start this conversation with quoting the Cypherpunk Manifesto, which is privacy is not secrecy. It's not, it's not this idea that you're not going to share anything with the world. It's this idea that you and you alone can choose what you want to share with the world. And I think that's fundamental for a free society, period, full stop. And that has been lost a little bit in this, new frontier digital age. I don't think people realize this is so much bigger than Bitcoin. Our whole lives are increasingly digital. We have these giant megacorps that their whole business model is surveillance capitalism. They are either voluntarily or coerced and compelled by governments to cooperate with them. So they basically become extensions of the state. And a lot of that is used as end arounds of the constitutional protections that we have as Americans specifically. Because the state says, oh, well, we're not doing the spying. The corporations are, and then we're just buying it through we're buying that data from them to then spy on you. Things like cell phones in your pocket, right? Location data 24/7, everyone you're communicating with, your photos, people have microphones in their house that are connected to the internet. They pay for the wiretap. There's millions of individuals around the world that pay to be wiretapped in their house for the convenience. So it can be very dark and frustrating once you start to realize that and you go down the rabbit hole and you realize most people do not realize that. And that's the case, I think there's a little bit more awareness within the Bitcoin community. But that's also the case in the Bitcoin community, for sure. Most people just are ignorant of it, oblivious to the fact, to the facts on the ground. And outside of the Bitcoin community, it's even worse, right? Very few people are paying attention to it. And I think the unfortunate reality is that there will have to be pain before people start to realize what is at stake and the freedom they're losing. And that's kind of the forcing function for change and improvement. And I think that change and improvement comes from a combination of open source software and individuals that make up the movement. It's easy to think of Bitcoin as a tech project, but really it is definitely a tech project, but at its core it's a movement of individuals that are empowered. And people have to actually stand up and push forward and make the thing happen. So I kind of think it's a children's touch the stove kind of thing. You don't realize the stove's hot until you touch it. I was, kind of hoping that we could avoid the really painful aspects of kind of that transitionary period while people figure it out. But it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many tweets you send out or you might reach some people, but I think the overwhelming majority, or how many podcasts you have or how many books are written, I think the overwhelming majority of people don't realize until after they've been burned. So I kind of have this kind of doomer optimism about it, I think it gets worse before it gets better, but then it will get better. And I think if you support the freedom tech movement, if you support open source contributors, their projects, and use the tools and improve your own skills, you can make that period of darkness, that period of pain less, and we can get out on the other side in the light quicker.
I guess just for the people who are listening who might not have been staying too close to this story and don't have a thorough understanding of it, I guess the reason really why this is so controversial that the government is now kind of cracking down on these privacy technologies is that essentially they are determining that someone is like a money transmitter. I mean, in the case of the Samurai Wallet guys, they're saying, well, you've created this technology. Even though they don't actually take custody of any of the funds, they essentially just kind of coordinate the whole thing and say, this is where the funds are going to be sent to, but we're not going to take custody of anything. We're not even going to touch the money. That is now considered to be a money transmitter, which kind of opens the door for so many things to be a money transmitter. I mean, I wonder, like, if I go into a shop and I give them like $10 and I say, hey, can you give me $10 bills because I, want to give it to, I don't know, a busker on the street or something. Are they now a money transmitter? Like we're kind of getting into very crazy territory where any exchange of money, which is supposed to be kind of, you're supposed to just be able to, especially if you're not touching it, like how can you consider that is a money transmitter? And it seems to me that what they're really doing is they're saying, we don't like what you're doing. We don't like that you're bringing privacy, and we are going to level whatever accusations that we can against you and try and make them stick, even though it makes no sense. But, of course, the problem is if you say that if you say that they're a money transmitter for doing this, well, is someone who's using, I don't know, like an encrypted app to send a message and they, someone sends a message to coordinate a terrorist attack, are you now a terrorist because you've developed an app with encryption? I mean, it kind of opens the door to this whole like area of like, well, anything can be a crime now, because building software is a crime. And I saw someone actually on Twitter, I can't remember who it is, I wish I could credit them now. And they said, where this is all going is that the government is going to start saying, you're going to have a license to be a developer. Like we're going to have to sign off on what you do, or you're going to have some kind of a license in the same way as you have a medical license. I mean, that might be an extreme take, but I'm interested to know where you think all this is going with this war on privacy. Like, where does it end now that this kind of Pandora's box has been opened?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say like this is not new. It hasn't just begun. This is something particularly on the encryption side that has been fought for many decades. And like that was interesting. The example you used of an encrypted message, is the developer liable for the contents of the message? That was heavily fought, right? There was a point in the late 80s, early 90s, where you weren't allowed to publish or share encryption software. And that was fought on a constitutional basis on code is speech, right? Code is just written code. And that we're supposed to be protected from that in our country. So it's a constant battle, both like on the tool side and on the legal front. It's a two-pronged battle. I personally would prefer to just completely ignore politics. But the unfortunate reality is that, if you live in a certain jurisdiction, like it's important to, have to, and it's important, but also your hand gets forced that you have to also fight legal battles. I think the unfortunate reality is, yes, like if you look specifically at the DOJ's argument in the Tornado Cash case, it opens the door for pretty much anything to be a money transmitter, because in both the Tornado case and in the Samurai case, and once again, not a lawyer, neither of them took custody of funds. They literally did not hold anybody's money. I think your example of like going to a store and exchanging cash is actually probably a poor example, because in that situation, you're actually giving them money and they're giving you back different money. I don't think anyone would consider that money transmission, but it's true. It's quite different in this case. In this case, neither party touched other people's money. They were just, they just shipped open source code. I think the unfortunate reality is something that we see a lot of times with government overreach, which is vague interpretations so that they can be selectively enforced, right? And in both cases, these were projects that were gaining significant momentum and significant usage. And after that success happened was when the enforcement happened, right? So it's like it creates this kind of chilling effect where developers are around the world and they're like, okay, like maybe my whole life will not be ruined and I'll get thrown in jail unless for some reason the project that I'm dedicating my life to and focusing on is successful, and then like it's just hanging over their heads, right? which is fucked up. That's incredibly fucked up. So I mean, we'll see how it plays out. Like it's obviously an ongoing situation. I think it's really positive to see the Bitcoin Policy Institute recently launched the P2P Rights Fund, which is a legal defense fund for open source contributors. Because the extra fucked up part of this whole thing is, in America and most of the world, you're provided free legal free public defenders, like free lawyers. But like if you're fighting like a federal criminal case, and like you want actual lawyers that like have your back and like can get things done, like this is in the millions of dollars. It's incredibly expensive. And oftentimes in these cases, they seize the money before they do it. So they seize the money, and then you have no money to defend yourself, and it's incredibly expensive. Yeah. So hopefully we see the community, both on the Bitcoin side and just like the greater open source community, kind of come together here. But I just want to reiterate, like this is not I don't think this is a new fight. This is just the next chapter.
Yeah. And speaking of next chapter, do you think that the next step that the government is going to take is that they will try to ban self-custody? Because I'm kind of full tinfoil hat on this one, where I actually think that the reason that I didn't think that an ETF would be approved like for a long time. Like it came sooner than I thought. And then once the ETF was approved, I was like, why would they have approved this? Why would they have, kind of let in the Trojan horse like into the gates? And now when I think about it, I think that this is just a way to normalize kind of not having self-custody. So they want all of the, 401ks and all of these things to kind of just flood out into the ETFs, so that then when they turn around and go, hey, by the way, we're banning self-custody, well, 90% of people are like, oh, well, I don't care because I don't have it in self-custody anyway. Whereas if self-custody is the norm, and the government doesn't open up avenues to make it really easy for non-self-custody, if that's the norm, then the most Bitcoin hodlers are going to kind of be like, no, we're going to really fight this. So interested to know whether you share my thoughts there, and also like, yeah, just what you think about where things are going with self-custody.
I'm trying in this current environment to be very careful about speculating. But what I think, and I've been pretty consistent about this, is I think what is more likely, and you're absolutely right, like the ETFs can basically be treated as like this massive custodial wallet. It's custodial wallet for suits, right? It's custodial wallet for the Charles Schwab types. And many people will be onboarded via that fashion. And right now, even like how the ETFs are designed, the only way to get out of them is to sell for dollars. You can't withdraw your Bitcoin. Now that might change. Supposedly that's not a regulatory requirement. It was just like prudence in terms of ETFs trying to get approved in that first batch. They didn't want to be the one left out because there was a lot of competition there. So hopefully we see some of these ETFs switch to in-kind where you can withdraw Bitcoin. Then it becomes a little bit better, right? Because then it's like kind of top of funnel for self-custody. But in the current way it's set up is you effectively have to sell. If Bitcoin price is up, that means you have to pay cap gains tax, so that can take a significant hit on your position. And then you have to go and then you have to buy Bitcoin separately and then self-custody it, which is a lot of friction. And I think that's kind of the trend we're seeing is rather than outright ban self-custody, which I think is would hopefully be fought tooth and nail by Bitcoin holders everywhere, because it would just be a blatant attack on the system. Because at the core, like the value prop to me of Bitcoin has always been spend and save without permission. And obviously, if you need permission to self-custody, the whole thing breaks. It doesn't make sense to me. Now we might pump in the meantime. But anyway, the point is I don't expect a full-on ban because it's just less effective. I think the frog boiling technique is something that we've seen time and time again. And the play would be is relatively simple. And we've seen this trend happen already, which is you just keep adding increased friction to self-custody, to legal self-custody, right? So like you add a ton of friction to it, you basically add all these hoops that like make a bunch of people, you like criminalize law-abiding behavior that shouldn't, like behavior that shouldn't be criminalized, and you add a ton of friction there. And then most people will just choose to use the ETFs or other custodial options because it's the easiest and the most convenient. And as those hoops keep getting added and the friction keeps getting added, there's a lot of stakeholders in the Bitcoin community that look at that in the opposite fashion. They look at it as like, they don't call it regulatory attacks on Bitcoin, they call it regulatory clarity. And we actually, during all of that, like we could continue to pump and Bitcoin price appreciates. And there's selective enforcements against certain individuals, and it kind of just, it creates this like dopamine hit. So like while the frog is boiling, the frog is also ecstatic that their bags are pumping, and they just are distracted and they're at peace. You know, it's like a tranquilizer. Like the price going up is a tranquilizer while the selective attacks and the friction just keep coming. I think that is probably the most likely. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Do you think that there is any existential threat here? Like if there's a kind of continuation and without a kind of general shift in the mentality of people, not just Bitcoiners, but people who are coming into Bitcoin, who are coming in via these avenues, like, do you think that if we just continue to not care about these things, that Bitcoin could be captured? Or do you think that Bitcoin is fundamentally uncapturable and that it's not designed to be captured as such?
I think I would definitely not say uncapturable. I think Bitcoin as a system is capture resistant, I guess. It's definitely censorship resistant. It's a very robust system. It's a global system, right? So it operates in almost every jurisdiction in the world. Different governments have different interests, right? And it's hard for them to almost ever agree on anything. So I think Bitcoin, the network, is probably past the point of no return. Like a very high degree of certainty on that. Like, you know, high 90s. I don't like speaking in absolutes, but I think Bitcoin is here and it's here to stay. I think the question is really, it's more of attack on the individuals that use it and capturing the individuals that use it. And I just would posit the question that if we end up in a Bitcoin standard world, right, Bitcoin keeps increasing in purchasing power with adoption, as has been the case, and as I expect to continue to be the case, and Bitcoin becomes this money that is used in nearly every financial transaction, or at least denominated in every financial transaction. You know, maybe there's IOUs and stuff, custodial stuff that's issued on top of it. We could very well end up in a situation where 5% of users are using it in a freedom-oriented way, but the overwhelming majority are using it in a surveilled, controlled, and captured way. And to me, that's not a win. To me, that would be a failure. That would suck.
Do you include within that category people who are buying via kind of KYC means?
I think there's shades to all of this.
Sure.
But, KYC was definitely, one of the first. This idea of creating lists of Bitcoiners and our entire transaction history is that is always, unfortunately, that is often used for control by malicious governments. And then also, it puts a ton of people at risk because this data is often leaked, it's sold. It can be used by malicious individuals to target people. And the way Bitcoin is designed is it's some people mistakenly think that it's private by default, but really, it's incredibly transparent, and all of those transactions are on the Bitcoin blockchain, this ledger of transactions forever. If we're right about Bitcoin, this transaction history on the blockchain will outlive all of us. And so what happens is, if you have a list of people and their transaction history tied to their identities, their home addresses, all this other personal information, and to go to our previous topic, what they're saying in their kitchen, where they're going, who they're talking to, all their photo history, everything. It starts to paint a really dystopian picture. And even if this stuff leaks, this stuff can, leak or be used against you 10 years down the line, right? Because all of that transaction data on the blockchain is going to be there still. Like you can, it doesn't require active surveillance. Like you can connect the dots in a passive way after the fact. So I think it makes the situation way more difficult. And I think it's also not effective for the purpose that is stated what it's for, which is to stop criminals. Criminals will often use bought or sold identities. They'll either use bought identities or stolen identities or fake identities. And they have ways of getting around this stuff. It's usually just regular people, law-abiding people that, want the best for their country and want the best for their fellow neighbor that get caught up in this stuff and get hurt. And I think, unfortunately, that really hasn't been that strong of an argument with policymakers in much of the world, because I think the real desire for it is to control the average person. They just sell it as a way of stopping criminals. So they hear that and they're like, yeah, and we know, like that's fine. So yeah, I think it makes it, I think this idea that I think in reality, if you look at it, is like 95%, 96% of people that are coming into Bitcoin are doing it in a way that adds them to a list with their transaction history, is very troubling. And I think a lot of developers, unfortunately, operate in this world where they're like, oh, but like they shouldn't do that, so I'm not going to operate in that world. And really, when you're thinking about these systems, when you're thinking about these tools, we don't live in a vacuum. Like you got to take in this external force. You have to operate in the assumption that most of your users of whatever open source software you're using are tied to their transaction history.
So what, as in, for example, if you're a wallet builder, to like put more emphasis on things like coin mixing, like by default rather than an opt-in system, is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
I will say, well, first of all, I think it's important to state that CoinJoin is not mixing. It's a collaborative transaction where no custody is taken. To me, mixing has always been, words, especially today's world, matter. And mixing historically, to me, has always meant, taking someone's Bitcoin and giving them someone else's Bitcoin and taking custody. I think, collaborative transactions are exactly what they are. They're a native Bitcoin transaction where you have multiple parties making a transaction together to save money and to have better privacy on chain. Because like this idea that like you're paying, like if you go and buy a sandwich, like the person you buy the sandwich from shouldn't know your entire transaction history and your net worth. Like that's insane. I think most people would say that's insane. I think the better example is like there's a lot of people. Look, Bitcoin development is a thankless job that is incredibly difficult, and I've dedicated much of my life to, particularly through OpenSats, but also through everything else I do to support these open source contributors who often work for free and dedicate a lot of their time, put themselves at risk and liability to work on these projects. But some of that development is like operates under the assumption that people aren't entering and exiting the system in this fully surveilled way. And I think it's imperative that when the operating assumption should be the exact opposite, right? The operating assumption should be they absolutely are, and that is the norm. That is not the rarity. Yeah.
So I know that I have a lot of people who listen to this podcast who they're not on board with Bitcoin on the basis that they say, well, there's other projects that are more private and those are the ones that we should support because, Bitcoin is so easily capturable. And they're talking about generally like Monero or Zcash or, there's other privacy coins out there and stuff. I'm not sure I've heard your take on other like privacy coins, whether you think that there is a place for them, whether you think that like there's things that can be learned from them, or do we, some people would say, well, if Bitcoin doesn't work, when we fall back entirely and we say, well, let's go to something that has privacy built in. I mean, there has been prominent Bitcoiners recently who have kind of seemed to throw their weight partially, if not entirely, behind Monero. Like there seems to be a couple of people out there who are voicing a lot about Monero now. And I'm just interested to know what you think about that, like these other projects and whether there's any kind of utility to them.
Well, so eCash specifically is
I do want to talk to you about eCash, but I said Zcash. eCash I want to talk to you about separately though.
Okay, I was confused that you threw eCash in there. Okay, Zcash. I mean, I think like Zcash never made any sense to me. I think most of the privacy coins are just complete bullshit. Zcash had a pre-mine. It was like based out of the United States with like rich, wealthy American investors. It just wasn't really an organic project. It was like to me, it was always like a clear scam. Like it just it never had a future.
I'd agree with you totally. I would agree with you on Zcash. I guess Monero is probably the one which people genuinely think has a fair issuance and stuff.
If you're going to talk about like a privacy-focused cryptocurrency, there's really only one. It's Monero. That has reasonably strong privacy guarantees. It's fairly easy to use. And people are using it for that. I will say that I do believe that all of these networks are competing monies. And it's interesting like how you see it all kind of play out in altcoin land. Like when ETH launched, right, it was very much, a lot of people were saying it wasn't a Bitcoin competitor. Then they were saying it was Bitcoin 2.0. Then they say it wasn't. And now like it's kind of coming back around to like they're all competing with each other. And the case is they've always been all competing with each other because you have opportunity costs. It's what are you going to hold? What are you going to keep the overwhelming majority of your savings in? Whether you're an individual, company, government, whatever. And the way that works, in my opinion, is you essentially have, we have the freest markets that have ever existed in humanity, traded 24/7. I would say the freest market is just straight up mining, right? Energy for Bitcoin requires no permission. But then like on the second, and like probably the second most free market in the world is Bitcoin trading against all of these other chains, because you can do it in a cryptographically native way. You can do it all digital. You don't have to interact with the existing financial system. There are centralized platforms. There are somewhat decentralized platforms and protocols that allow you to swap between them relatively easily. And as a result, you basically have this 24/7 competition between all of them. And the way I look at it is, I just don't think, I don't think that Monero can compete with Bitcoin long term in terms of holding purchasing power. Like, and I think history has shown that. Like, it might have been somewhat controversial to the people that are solely focused on Monero when I said it in 2019, and when I said it in 2020, and when I said it in 2021, and when I said it in 2022. But all you have to do is like look at a price chart. Like, it continues to trend down in terms of Bitcoin. And to me, that there's a direct correlation there with adoptions. Like, how much is being held of each and who's choosing to hold what of each. So I think it doesn't really come down to my opinion. I think the world is going to correlate on what they think is the best money. I think that is Bitcoin. And so I think we're going to live in a Bitcoin world. So I think it's more effective to focus on making whatever that Bitcoin world is as best as it can be, rather than the alternative, right? Like, that's, to me, like that's how kind of I think through how I prioritize my time.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And I think that ultimately, like, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build like a decentralized ledger, which, is, you can essentially identify how much you own, and you can kind of like audit the whole thing, right? Like that's at the core. And yes, like privacy and these things are great to have. But the problem is if everyone kind of says, right, okay, well, this thing has like better privacy and therefore let's just kind of like all move to it. Well, now rather than saying we want to build a global ledger, now you've said, no, we're just going to skip to whatever the ledger is that happens to be, have the next best feature. And if everyone does that, then none of it works, right? Because it's almost like a prisoner's dilemma type situation. If everyone suddenly says, okay, well, let's hop to the next thing because this one has better privacy. Well, then it becomes a game of who's going to be the first to hop. It becomes a game of like, okay, everyone's in Bitcoin, and then it's like, who's going to be the first to hop and which one's it going to be? And then let's pump this new thing. And the whole thing, I think, kind of falls apart. So like, I think that, there are like other coins which have interesting features and stuff like that. But my take is that like, I think that we should just always learn from them. And then when we're ready and when it's a necessity and when there's kind of consensus, we say, let's bring those things onto Bitcoin. Like we're ready for it now. But the most important thing is that you don't have this kind of game of hot potato where everyone's jumping to the next project. Like, and I guess this gets more into like a philosophical point as well, because like it takes individual character to do that. It takes character, like hardened character, for people to go, okay, I know that there's complications here with privacy, and it would be really easy to just, sell up and switch to Monero, but that's going to break the entire concept that we can have a global distributed ledger like altogether. So no, we have to like stick with this thing, try to build it out, try to get consensus for the changes and kind of take the hard route. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on the Monero thing.
Just two key concepts here that I think are important in kind of understanding like the framework where I come from. First of all, a lot of altcoin promoters think that Bitcoin being hard to change is a negative, that it doesn't innovate and is slow moving. It's the exact opposite, in my opinion. Like if you're building the base of a global censorship-resistant financial network, it needs to be hard to change, because if it's easy to change, if there's rulers that are able to push through changes really easily, then they can be used to push through bad changes and destroy the system. So it needs to be incredibly hard to change. And the Bitcoin consensus, this rough consensus that results in slow and steady iterations over time, is absolutely fascinating and is core to the whole system. And then second of all, it needs to be able to be used without any kind of trust. People need to be able to easily run nodes. They need to be able to, if you're not using your own node, you're using someone else's node, and you're trusting them with both your privacy, and you're trusting them with enforcing the rules of the network. And what that usually looks like in practice is you're using some kind of corporate node or company go-between to interact with the network. And everything starts to break down there. And the thing is like, the reality of the situation is most people are going to probably interact in a trusted or semi-trusted way with the network. But it's important that at any time, anyone can choose to do it in a way that doesn't require permission or doesn't require trust. And those are like the two key Bitcoin principles that I think make it the best money in the world, that make it very hard to compete with.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So on that note, actually, with Bitcoin like being really difficult to change, you've got like this kind of debate going on at the moment in the community about like ossification versus non-ossification. And sometimes I'm unsure what people mean when they say ossify, whether they mean like we can have a hard fork or no more soft forks or whatever like that means. I think that there's a bit of ambiguity over the term there. But like, do you think that Bitcoin will ever hard fork? Just to take that most kind of like extreme example there, do you think that will happen, or do you think that people are just saying, well, no, we can never have a hard fork, everything's just got to be like soft forks or nothing from this point on? Like where do you stand on that kind of ossification debate?
Well, it's like the beauty of the concern with hard forks is if one of the key tenets of Bitcoin is we don't have auto updates, and the reason we don't have auto updates is the same argument or tangential argument to what I just made about it being hard to change by default, which is if you had auto updates, then a malicious auto update, it's like who controls the auto update, and you can just have a malicious auto update that hurts the network and hurts users. So users choose when they want to update their software, when they want to update their nodes. And the thing is hard fork scenario, to proceed with that hard fork, everyone has to update, right? And it's a particularly dangerous situation because there are only so many people that can actually read and verify the code. There might be, some unforeseen issue that happens, and you don't have any old nodes to fall back on. In a soft fork scenario or a no fork scenario, you have someone running, an old version of Bitcoin Core is still in consensus and can still validate the chain and can still proceed. And a lot of times what you see is miners and other stakeholders in the system will not update right away when there's a new update. So it's really nice maintaining backwards compatibility. It adds a level of robustness to the system that we wouldn't have otherwise. I think hard forks are necessary, and I've been very consistent about it. It's a little bit more of a tense topic because I do think there are some bad actors that have historically pushed for hard forks. But I don't think hard forks are necessarily something that they're concerning and they can be risky. But the beauty of a hard fork situation, and we saw one in 2017 with Bitcoin Cash, is effectively what happens is if you are currently holding Bitcoin and there's a hard fork, they have a shared past history, but going forward, their history changes, right? You have two chains that go forward. And what happens in practice is that you have an equivalent amount of Bitcoin in each chain. Now, what that results in is it essentially results in market participants choosing which chain they think is the better money, which kind of goes back to the altcoin argument. And they can trade against it. They can sell one side to go to the other side. Or if they have no idea what the hell's going on, they can just hold both. And it's no skin off their back, whatever situation happens. So I believe there's one hard fork that has to be done, like 2140 or something. I don't know the exact date, 2100 or something like that. Because of something to do with the clock.
The timestamp bug. Yeah.
I mean, we're all going to be dead by that time. So that's an issue that our grandkids or whatever are going to have to deal with. But I personally, I'm of the belief that I think that there's a solid majority that's in the middle that believe that open source projects are effectively living organisms, and they always are just constantly, getting iterative improvements and need to evolve over time through this almost rough consensus and opt-in behavior. And ossification just doesn't make any sense to me, and I just don't think is realistic. And then I think there's a lot of people that are just move fast and break things, which I think we shouldn't do with something that our whole future relies on. It's too important to move incredibly fast. But with all that said, I would never rule out, I think if the system is attacked or if there's some kind of vulnerability or something that there's really strong motivation and momentum by stakeholders of Bitcoin. And the thing is, it's really hard to measure pre-fork. But, let's say 90%, 95% of stakeholders in the system believe that, Bitcoin needs some kind of improvement and that requires a hard fork. It could happen. And if it does happen, I think the market then kind of figures it out afterwards. It might be a bit chaotic. 2017 wasn't, it was a kind of a fun time, but not if you had your whole entire life savings in it and you were relying on it. I was concerned. It was part of the reason why I kind of came out of the shadows and became more public in the first place. But I think it kind of just would work itself out if there was actually, to me, that's where a lot of my, that's where, for me, I don't have blind faith in Bitcoin. I have faith in Bitcoin. It's not blind faith. And I have faith that stakeholders will protect the system and improve it if we have to. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if that'll ever happen. But if for some reason there had to be some kind of change that required a hard fork, and this hard to measure, motivation happened, and there was strong developers behind it, Like there could be a hard fork, and I don't think it'd be the end of the world. I think it would just be briefly chaotic. And maybe that hard fork, just becomes Bcash. I think what happens kind of is, I think people took some of the wrong lessons from Bcash, which was like, hard forks are always doomed to fail. I think it was just, most of the community disagreed with that hard fork. And I think what kind of happens is there's like a window of opportunity maybe. There's like 3 to 6 months after a fork, where like one side wins and one side doesn't, and the other one just trends to zero over time. It's like, it's not going to be like a prolonged neck and neck even kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I kind of see this whole hard fork thing, because, I remember everything happening in 2017. That was, like the first kind of real big test case for this, like, what happens. And I think you're right. Since then, a lot of people have said, oh, well, we should just never fork. Like, this is what happens with a fork. But yeah, like you said, that fork, the reason that chain, that the value just went down is because there wasn't, ultimately kind of the market participants didn't favor that fork. But I think that going forward, there will be forks. I don't see any reason there shouldn't be a fork that people favor, right? And there's always going to be people who say, no, we shouldn't fork, right? Those people are always going to be there who say we shouldn't do it all. But let's say 90% of, market participants say, okay, great. Like, the fork's a good idea. Even if, like, I think there's a bit of a sentiment sometimes where people say, oh, well, no, it's got to be 100%. It's got to be absolute consensus. Yeah. But I'm okay with having a fork if one of the chains, has 10% of the value and the other has 90% of the value, let's say, and that's how the distribution occurs. And then those chains compete for a while, and then we see what pans out over time. I'm okay with it because as far as I'm concerned, like, we've got hard money now. This money is going up like by orders of magnitude every cycle or every year or however, whatever time measurement you want to give. I think that it's a small price to pay occasionally having a fork which kind of like leeches value off the chain, which, essentially will diminish value for some period of time. I think that is a very reasonable price to pay to have a robust system which is able to change over time. And, I kind of see it almost like a snake shedding its skin. It's like you've got the main chain, but every now and then you're going to have a skin that gets shed, which is this chain, which kind of is an offshoot. But the thing has become stronger as a result of it. So I'm not afraid of, I think that being afraid of forks to me is quite like high time preference thinking, because I think that they're going to make the system more robust over time. And yeah, okay, it's going to affect the value in the short term, but that's the price you pay for a system like Bitcoin, which trends towards becoming like more robust and having more utility.
I will just say, like, there's a key risk there, right? Which is, as I said, is everyone that's participating in a hard fork has to update to the newest node client. So there is inherently some risk there. And that's why there needs to be like overwhelming momentum. Like, and then the other key piece is that anyone can fork. Me and you could right now, we could just fork Bitcoin. We could be like, the classic example is we could just, instead of 21 million Bitcoin, what if we just stopped our fork at 18 million Bitcoin so it's more scarce, or like we can inflate it. Oh, well, let's do a fork to 42 million Bitcoin. Nobody would follow us. Like, talking about trending to zero, it would just instantly be zero. Like, no one would take our fork coin. Yeah. They would just consider that bullshit. So anyone can fork at any time. I'm actually surprised that you don't see more of them across the whole ecosystem. Like, when I earlier in my Bitcoin journey, like, I expected there to be, constant fork attempts, not just on Bitcoin, just across chains. And you really don't see that many. And I think part of that is because there's not that many individuals that are savvy enough to do it and that want to go through the trouble when they know, they're not going to make any money off of it. But yeah, I think we pretty much agree on that front. And we'll see what happens. Like, I do think, and there'll never be 100% consensus on anything. But the overwhelming majority of people rejected Bcash. Like, the support for Bitcoin Cash was very little. It was oversold as being quite high. And I think there's actually an argument that in that situation, it was value accretive. Like, well, first of all, obviously, if you sold your Bcash, you got more Bitcoin. But even if you didn't, you can just look at the Bitcoin price chart and plot where Bitcoin Cash happened. Bitcoin is up tremendously since then in terms of purchasing power.
Yeah, totally. Do you ever worry that, when that happened, like it was even smaller group of people in the community than it is now, like there were more, like probably more people who were more hardcore. Bitcoin was less mainstream. It was still kind of like a bit of a weird thing. Do you worry that like in the future, when Bitcoin becomes fully mainstream, let's say everyone's running nodes on their phone and all this kind of stuff, that, the spooks could just have a campaign to try to like get the normies to change their opinion? Right now these conversations happen in the Bitcoin community. Most people don't even know that there was a Bitcoin Cash fork or anything like this, but in the future it could be on the mainstream news. It's like, hey, you tune into your 7 a.m. news or whatever, and they're saying, hey, everyone should change their node to this version because this is going to be like way better, and you're being promoted it through all the channels and all the corporations are on board. Like, could kind of like, I guess, normification of Bitcoin like be its downfall? Like, have you thought about this attack vector?
Well, I think this is why like the ride or dies matter the most. The most active participants, the people who have the most skin in the game, matter the most, and this is why it's also hard to measure pre-fork. I think that the example that people throw around now post ETF is like, what if BlackRock wants to fork? They're the largest asset manager in the world. What if they decide that they want to change Bitcoin? And this is why, SegWit2x, Bcash is actually a really great case study, because at the time Bitcoin was smaller, but it was the corporate interests that wanted to change Bitcoin. It was the largest Bitcoin miner. It was the largest exchanges and the VCs and all of this stuff that wanted to change Bitcoin, and they failed. And there, something might get repeated like that on a bigger basis. But the important thing to realize is, at the end of the day, in that kind of situation, maybe that chaotic period is longer than 3 to 6 months. Maybe it's, 5-year period where the market is trying to figure itself out. Maybe the fork chaos lasts longer in that situation, just because the participants that are on the hostile side, let's say that they're attacking Bitcoin, they're trying to, change Bitcoin to a less valuable asset, or a less freedom-focused asset, have more money and more influence. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the case. But at the end of the day, like when you start to think about like the market dynamics, right? First of all, we have the advantage of how Satoshi designed the Bitcoin emission schedule. So the overwhelming majority of Bitcoin that will ever exist has already been mined and already been distributed in a permissionless fashion around the world. A large percentage of that is held in self-custody by individuals, not by governments, not by corporations, not in Coinbase, not on ETFs. It's held by individuals that are holding self-custody, that are holding the keys themselves. And at the end of the day, like when you start to think about the market dynamics of how that fork happens, right, and what happens next, is that market price is strictly dictated by people selling one side of the fork for the other side of the fork. And that is a final transaction. There are no take-backsies. So in that type of situation, let's just continue using BlackRock as an example. BlackRock would have to have the conviction to sell against the other side and sell their Bitcoin, or sell their original chain and buy the fork coin. And that might be successful for them in the beginning. And then the market might turn on them. Maybe the majority of self-custody participants, maybe the majority of economic actors in the space, the majority of Bitcoin holders in the space disagree with them and just keep buying it. Just they just keep trading their fork coin in the opposite way. And it can be very scary. Like it's hard for an entity, an economic actor, a relatively rational economic actor. That is greedy, that wants to be as rich as possible, which is what Bitcoin operates under, is that at its core, every entity, every individual is going to try to operate in a situation where they are greedy and and rational and want to accumulate as much wealth as possible. It takes a lot of conviction to make that risk. And it's kind of like home field advantage when like wars are fought. Like the defending country has higher morale. And that's kind of one of the reasons I think Bitcoin defaults to like no change. Like the default is always no change. Because it's easier to just hold your ground than it is to try and push something new through. And even if you look at 2017, like Bitmain was arguably, Bitmain is kind of a centralizing issue still, a pretty big centralizing issue. It recently came out that their pool basically indirectly controls 47% of the hash rate. They're one of the two largest mining manufacturers. But in 2017, they directly and indirectly controlled to probably like 70% of the hash rate. The overwhelming majority of new miners that were being produced by them, and they were only, they could only sell them to their friends if they wanted to. And even in that situation, Bitmain didn't have the conviction to move any kind of majority of their hash rate over to the fork. Gian, the founder of Bitmain, never had the conviction to go all in on his fork. And why was that? Because he was scared of losing his golden goose. His whole future relied on Bitcoin, and he didn't want to break it. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to fuck it up. His bluff was kind of called. And I think you could kind of, that's what protects us. And that can be scary for people because it's not necessarily black and white, right? It's not like, this definitely won't happen or this definitely will happen. But to me, I think, that makes it quite difficult for a small minority to like do anything hostile. It's really difficult to push through a hostile change because in the BlackRock example, they could end up with no Bitcoin in a Bitcoin world. And then they're not BlackRock anymore. They're no longer the world's largest asset manager. They lost all their money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. That like this is the game theory is completely shifted with all this stuff. You mentioned, right. We've kind of discussed the Bitcoin ETF and how that's changed things. So I think that like I won't go more into that. But like I want to talk a little bit about the kind of corporate adoption of Bitcoin. Like we had MicroStrategy adopt Bitcoin in I think it was 2020 maybe or 2021. I'm not sure exactly. I think 2020, right?
It was 2020. It was a couple of months after the last halving.
That's right. And since then, when this happened at the time, I thought this is going to change everything. You're going to have like so many corporations flood into this. Like everyone's going to be kind of playing catch up now, and everyone's incentivized to be, the first mover has already moved. Now the second mover is more incentive to be that person, to be that entity. But I've kind of been a bit, I don't want to say disappointed, not that I necessarily care if corporations are in. I'd rather have individuals get in before the corporations. So I'm kind of happy about it in a way, but I'm very surprised, let's put it that way, that more corporations haven't gone in and adopted this strategy, which has been very, very successful for MicroStrategy. Interested to know your thoughts on all of that. Why has that not been the case?
I think most things tend to happen slower than people expect. It's kind of like gradually, then suddenly is kind of, to quote Parker Lewis, I think that is generally how things play out in almost all aspects of life. People are inherently just don't take unnecessary risks or what they believe are unnecessary risks, and the result is information does not spread as quickly as people would expect, and those of us that pay very intimate attention to these things always kind of overestimate how quickly things are moving. The pump fake for me was Tesla adding Bitcoin to their treasury. It was an S&P 500 company. I was like, oh shit, okay, maybe it is going to happen. Maybe we're in the settling phase, and you always get kind of pump faked on that. I think what we really see is, and I've witnessed this in 1031 because, 1031, we're an institutional level venture fund. We're still small compared to the crypto VCs or the traditional tech VCs that operate in the billions of dollars. We've deployed $125 million, but we're by and far the largest in terms of money deployed portfolio of Bitcoin VCs, of Bitcoin specific, of investors focused on supporting Bitcoin companies. And so we have a lot, our investor base goes from individual level all the way up to institutions. And so we have a lot of conversations with larger companies or college endowments, very rich family offices, stuff like that. And what you see a lot of times is there's occupational risk in terms of who manages the money and who chooses which investments to do. And nobody wants to be the guy that takes the bet that Bitcoin is going to increase in purchasing power substantially, and then be wrong and lose a shit ton of money. They'll lose their job. They'll probably lose their career. It is way safer for them to just hold cash, buy treasuries, buy the S&P 500. Even if they're not outperforming the market, like they probably won't lose their job. They probably won't lose their career. They'll probably still get their salary. So the risk reward there is kind of weighted to not take the risk. Now, Saylor deserves, a ton of props for jumping in and taking that risk, and particularly going through the bear market, doing that, and continuing to stack and continue to double down and accumulate. But it's important to realize, like, he has complete control over his company. Like, he controls his own destiny. He obviously had some kind of risk. The risk was him losing a shit ton of money, but he was going to lose his own money for the most part. It wasn't necessarily occupational risk. I think the ETFs change things, because I think when you have like a BlackRock or something, where they can just, buy the BlackRock ETF. But first of all, BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world, very credible institution. I think if you start to see institutions dabble in that, and if they lose their money on that, like, they probably won't lose their job or their career, because they just bought a traditional ETF. They bought a traditional instrument. They didn't like go out and buy this, brand new magic internet money. So I think we're starting to see the tides turn there. Saylor also advocated for a change to like the FASB accounting standard. So like before that, what happened was if Bitcoin went down in price, you had to mark it as a loss. But if Bitcoin went up in price, you couldn't mark it as profit. Now you can mark it as profit. So if we're in a bull run, I expect MicroStrategy, he's going to be on CNBC. He's like, we're the most profitable company in the world. And it's literally just Bitcoin price appreciation. But other companies are going to want to be on CNBC and stuff. So then all of a sudden they have even more advantage. So it's a combination of reducing friction, reducing occupational risk, and adding reward there in terms of being able to dock it as profits to your investors.
Right. That's interesting. I didn't know that they had this system where if it went down, it would be logged, and if it went up, it wouldn't. That seems completely bizarre. Like, surely you just count the value of the capital as a whole, and that's your metric. But
it's kind of malicious.
Yeah, it sounds it. So also, just on that point, I think another indication that things are changing is when it comes to the ETFs. I think it was Vanguard's CEO or something like that was basically like he lost his position, I think, and then kind of was changed out because, I mean, I don't think they said explicitly it was because they didn't put forward a Bitcoin ETF, but it seems like based on their replacement that pretty much is the reason, is because they missed a massive opportunity there. I think that seems to me to be another indicator that things are moving in the opposite direction. Like you said, Saylor took the big risk, but now at least when it comes to these kind of big funds, the bigger risk is not to have a Bitcoin ETF, and presumably that's going to trickle down as well into these kind of corporations where eventually the risk is going to be not to leverage into Bitcoin to some degree.
Yeah, so specifically what happened there was Vanguard operates as a platform where other people can manage their investments, particularly retirement accounts. And one of their largest competitors in that front is Fidelity. And the Vanguard policy at ETF launch that was led by the CEO was we will never let people invest in Bitcoin ETFs through their managed IRA products or any of their managed funds that are in Vanguard. And what happened was a lot of people switched from Vanguard to Fidelity or other providers so that they could buy the Bitcoin ETF.
Yeah.
And then he was, it seems too much to be a coincidence. Like 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, he was canned and replaced. And I don't know if they've since changed their policy, but it feels like it had to be related. They presumably lost a lot of accounts. I talked to a lot of people that moved their retirement accounts out of Vanguard because they wanted to buy their Bitcoin ETF. And to be clear, this wasn't just Vanguard. There were especially, over the ETFs launched late January. There were a lot of hoops that average people had to jump through to get access to them. A lot of different investment firms were basically treating them as a risky asset, and they were telling people that they weren't allowed to buy them. And a lot of them have changed their tune since. And I think it goes towards the idea of this occupational risk. We're seeing it switch in the opposite way, and it's hard to pinpoint when that is going to happen. Maybe in the history books we look back and it already happened, because usually this kind of thing is not clear till afterwards when the suddenly phase happened. But at some point, the occupational risk is that you did not allocate to Bitcoin. Imagine you're running, Harvard's endowment, one of the largest university endowments in the world, and you don't buy Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, grows to dominate, and all of a sudden your assets are worth way less than every other endowment you're competing with and every other fund you're competing with. Then you lose your job and you will never get hired again. And it flips. And so we're starting to see that transition happen.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty crazy how all of this plays out. I mean, like ETF seems like it's changed a lot about like the way that finance is approaching this, and I think that it's inevitable corporations are going to follow. So I think that soon we're going to have more touches of corporations going in. I think that will come in cycles in the same way that you have price cycles. Personally, I think you will also have corporate entry cycles, but I guess we'll see.
Specifically, what you see right now is you see a lot of corporations are holding a ton of cash. They're holding a ton of dollars and they're holding a ton of treasuries. And I think that is particularly, it's going to look back that they made a horrible decision. And I mean, obviously, I have my bias. I think they should move a significant portion of that into Bitcoin, and I think a lot of them will over time. But even into other kind of hardish assets that are less hard than Bitcoin. And there is just hundreds of billions of dollars just sitting on the sidelines, just sitting in this money that is just basically going through hyperinflation, and we're just witnessing it go through hyperinflation. So I don't think like whatever return they're getting on treasuries, whatever the current treasury yield is, really compensates for what real inflation is. And so like they're just watching their assets evaporate. And people's, jobs will be on the line if they fail to act on that.
Totally agree, man. Totally agree. All right, let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin scaling. We touched. Well, you started touching on eCash earlier when I mentioned Zcash. What are your thoughts on eCash? I know that there's a bit of mixed opinion on this, on the basis that the supply can be inflated and all these kind of things. I guess first of all, just for the people who don't know what eCash is, do you mind giving like a little bit of a primer and then also just your thoughts on it as well?
Yeah. So eCash was one of the early cypherpunk innovations back in the 80s. And it was basically this digital cash that was incredibly easy to transfer. It used cryptographic signatures so that you could do it in a trust minimized way. It has very strong privacy guarantees. It's incredibly efficient. But the problem is it doesn't inherently have value. It represents value somewhere else. And it represents value that is held by a centralized entity. And so what that meant in the 80s was that banks had to adopt it. You needed to get bank buy-in to basically issue this digital cash token that was backed by dollars in your bank. And banks weren't about it, too much risk for them. Regulators were naturally slow to move and skeptical of it, and maybe outright hostile. So the thing never really happened. Fast forward to today, and there's a growing developer community that are building eCash systems on top of Bitcoin. And the beauty there is you get all the benefits of this digital cash. But instead of having to integrate with banks, you can use this permissionless global financial network that is Bitcoin, and you can back the whole thing by Bitcoin. Now, I think it is incredibly compelling. I think it's something that we can use today. I think the open source ecosystem around it is astounding and amazing. It's pretty crazy how quick a lot of this stuff has moved. We did a bounty program. OpenSats did a bounty program in partnership with Strike and HRF 18 months ago. And Callie, who is the creator and the lead maintainer of the Cashew protocol, which is the dominant eCash implementation right now, received that grant. And where we are today, 18 months later, is insane. Like, it is just crazy how quick the development has moved. The way I look at it is I kind of look at it as like a practical thing. I hope that one day, I don't consider it a scaling solution. I hope one day that, people smarter than me innovate in ways that we can expand self-custody to as much of the world as possible. But Bitcoin, as it currently stands today, cannot support the whole world holding self-custody. And that's because of just basic limitations in maintaining censorship resistance and the robustness of the network. If we were trying to expand right now, like the simplest way to expand the potential amount of people who could self-custody, you go right up against this idea of the amount of people and the ease of running your own node, which is absolutely integral to the robustness of the whole system. So to try and do it that way, which is what Bcash wanted to do essentially, right? It was increase the block size, reduce fee pressure in terms of that. It adds the burden to the nodes. And so in that attempt, if you do that simple path forward, what happens is, in the short term, maybe you increase the amount of people that can self-custody, but in the long term, no one can self-custody because the whole system fucking collapses on itself and becomes centralized. So as Bitcoin currently stands today, all 8 billion people in the world, or 8+ billion people in the world, can self-custody. And a lot of people just proactively choose, even those that are economically able to self-custody, because they can afford the fees and whatnot to actually use on-chain Bitcoin and hold their own keys, choose not to out of convenience, because it's always more convenient to not take personal responsibility. Responsibility is inherently more difficult than not having responsibility. It's like a key tenet in our lives. So a lot of people are choosing custodians. Some people, if there's not future innovations, will have no choice but to trust other people because of the economic realities of the situation. So the way I look at Cashew, the way I look at Fedimint, which is basically a multi-sig eCash instead of a single sig eCash, is people are already choosing to use custodians. Some people will be forced to use custodians just because of the economic realities. So let's make the custodians the best they can possibly be. And so like eCash as a technology is to me is like, okay, it's very pragmatic. It's like, okay, people are using custodians, let's make the custodians better. So how does it make a custodian better? First of all, it's way more efficient to run. It's way easier for someone to stand up a competing custodian. So you can have many eCash mints around the world that are all competing with each other in almost like a free banking type of situation. And you have privacy from the custodians. Right now, if you use like a wallet of Satoshi or a Strike or something like that, the custodian can see every transaction you make in all your balances. So it improves on those three levels. And then Fedimint adds that extra piece that instead of a single custodian being able to rug you, it's a group of people that have to kind of come together to steal your money or to inflate your money.
Yeah. I'm also pretty bullish on everything going on with eCash. Like you said, Cashew at the moment is more, it definitely seems more built out and it's actually being used today. Fedimint seems a little bit less kind of ready, like kind of, production ready. But I think that Fedimint will be an awesome development as well. I'm interested about something you just said though, because you said you don't think that eCash is a scaling solution. You don't see it as a scaling solution. Why don't you think so?
I mean, I think it's mostly semantics, and I know some people disagree with me. I just don't think. I mean, what is a scaling? What are you scaling? You're definitely not scaling self-custody Bitcoin usage.
No, you're not, but you're scaling transaction throughput, basically.
But like, are ETFs a scaling solution?
Yeah, I think technically you could say yes. You could argue yes. I mean, I don't think that it's a good one, but I think you could say if it's going to... I think that if it's going to take... I think anything that takes transactions off the main chain and allows people to transact value separately, essentially, like, so we can have more transactions overall, I would consider anything like that a scaling solution. But yeah, you're right. It does get a bit nuanced.
I would say I don't think it's a scaling solution because I don't think ETFs are scaling. I don't think anything custodial is a scaling solution. I think to be a scaling solution or a scaling option, the user needs to be able to interact with it in a trust minimized, permissionless way. And that's the dichotomy with something like Lightning, which has a ton of trade-offs in terms of complexity and liquidity management and on-chain fee burden. But at its core, like, Lightning is simply a interoperable protocol for batched transactions that are settled on chain. Ultimately, you're doing a multi-sig channel open on chain, and at any point, either participant can close it on chain and take back their on-chain Bitcoin without trusting the other party, without asking the other party's permission to do that. In eCash, like, it is more of a private banking type of capitalistic, private banking, free market kind of situation where you have all these custodians, and you do have the benefit that you have the privacy of the custodians. You do have the benefit that with Lightning you can easily transfer between them if they're not being malicious, and you do have the benefit of all the competition. But at the end of the day, like, as soon as you send Bitcoin, like your own Bitcoin, real Bitcoin, into an eCash mint, you may never get that Bitcoin out. You have to rely on permission from someone to get that Bitcoin out. And I think that's the key difference. And I think what happens is like, maybe that is the world we enter. Maybe there isn't, there probably isn't some miracle innovation that someone smarter than me comes up with. Hopefully there is. And there's a lot of, development trying to make that happen. But if there's, there's a world where, like, you have these private banks, and what is a private bank when you have like thousands and thousands of unregulated private banks that are competing with each other? The result is going to be like a lot of people there's going to be a lot of bank runs, and there's going to be a lot of, exit scams and people losing their money. And I think what's kind of interesting there, though, is there's this protocol called Nostr that is this permissionless, censorship-resistant communication protocol and identity protocol that, when mixed with these systems, we already see in the wild right now, basically like a decentralized, censorship-resistant trust pilot kind of thing, where there are reputational scores, and people that you trust could be like, I don't think this bank is going to scam me. They have good payment reliability. They have low fees, and the user can make an educated decision on who they want to trust, because there will be lots of funds lost if a large amount of people are using eCash. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case. It's hard not to imagine otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's a very measured and realistic view about eCash. So I'll move on to something which you've just mentioned here, actually, which is Nostr. I've not talked about Nostr much on this podcast, mainly because I'm still kind of a Nostr noob myself. I kind of support it in principle. I've found that it's only been very recently, personally, that I found the Nostr clients like usable. Or not they were usable, but I kind of found that I would go on there and just be like, I'm seeing so much stuff that just doesn't interest me. Like it wasn't really working for me, but it's got a lot better lately. And obviously you're a big advocate for it. You're supporting Nostr projects through OpenSats. You've recently completely left Twitter altogether to move fully over to Nostr, which is, I think a really awesome move. You're really kind of putting your money where your mouth is there. I guess just your thoughts generally on like Twitter and Nostr and social media and how all of this kind of decentralized or potentially decentralized social media kind of environment is going to play out.
Well, first of all, like at its core, Nostr is this censorship-resistant interoperable communication protocol. It's actually quite bigger than and identity protocol, quite bigger than just social media. I think social media is going to be the first major use case. It's kind of an adoption mechanism in a lot of ways, but it's a free speech protocol. It's a protocol that allows people to broadcast communication around the world in an interoperable way, and apps and bots and stuff to also communicate directly with each other without any trusted third parties. And everything's cryptographically verified, right? So you know that data isn't changed in transit by some kind of malicious actor, which is important, the data integrity aspect of it. Now, why is that important as Bitcoiners? Well, if you take freedom money, Bitcoin, and you mix it with this communication protocol, all of a sudden the sky's the limit. Like you can do some crazy things in terms of, one basic one would be like a freedom version of Venmo, right? Where you have the UX where two wallets that are maintained by different people can have combined contact lists. And instead of doing a Bitcoin address or a Bitcoin invoice, you could simply just look up Johnny and be like, pay him $20. And I mean, maybe it's 20,000 sats, maybe it's denominated in dollars, but at the end of the day, sats are what are flowing between. So there's really cool implications there on this. And I think that's one of the issues that Bitcoin has had in terms of adoption is that when you do look at like, what are the traditional financial payment apps that people like, is they are the Venmos and the Cash Apps, they are the Revoluts. It's like really polished. I think a lot of people, like the ability, they pay for dinner or something and they need to get money from their friends. They're not waiting for their friend to pay them. They're able to just send them a payment request, right? They're able to type in Johnny and be like, you owe me $20 for burgers. And Nostr kind of opens up that possibility in an interoperable open source way. Now on the social media side, we've never lived in this world before. Like this is what people don't realize. Like, first of all, it is fucking insane for a single person or a small group of people to control our online existence. Like that is ridiculous. Big tech will call it walled gardens. They are effectively prisons. They're panopticons. You're surveilled, you're controlled. They choose how your speech is propagated around the network. And some people's livelihoods rely on it, and they can just completely just blackball you and destroy your whole life by banning you from these platforms. And I am definitely not a Trump supporter, but like this is not a hypothetical. Like the sitting president of the United States was banned from Twitter. Arguably one of the most powerful people in the world, the guy who sits in the White House, like controls the nukes, like the largest nuke arsenal in the world, or the second largest if Russia's bigger or whatever, but definitely the most effective nuke arsenal in the world. Most influential person in the world, banned from Twitter. So if it can happen to him, it can happen to anybody. And so I think it's important that if our lives are going to be increasingly digital and increasingly reliant on these digital systems, just like money, it's important that there's no single entity in control. And that entity doesn't even have to be malicious, even though oftentimes these entities are malicious. Like I like to think that most people don't think Zuckerberg has your best interests at heart. Or like the CCP has your best interests at heart, or TikTok, or Elon has your best interests at heart, or Twitter. They can also be coerced and compelled into doing these things. Like, I also don't believe that Twitter leadership, unilaterally chose to ban Trump at the time. Like, I think that they were effectively forced to, both between government interests and also corporate ad interests that pay their bills. So we can't that is untenable. And it's important that we have ways for people to communicate and people to broadcast messages and do it in a way that is censorship resistant. And that's why Nostr to me is so important. And at its core, what's really cool is like right now, if you want to talk, you're right. I mean, it's still so early in Nostr's development. I mean, I think it's like less than 3 years old at this point.
Yeah, definitely.
But what's really cool is like there are 30 plus apps that you can use to interact with Nostr, and if one app gets banned or bans you or whatever, you can just move to the other app. You don't lose your followers. You don't lose the people you're following. You don't lose your notes. You don't lose the content that you post, and all of it can be directly monetized with Bitcoin. People can, if you're a content creator, or you're like creating podcasts, or you're creating long form articles or art or something like that, or you're selling goods, like people can just pay you with Bitcoin, and that's like that free speech protocol mixed with the freedom money is fucking crazy. So yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, never wanted to be an influencer. I'm a father now. Like my focus is my family, and like I just think like if you go down this hole of centralized corporate surveillance, it gets so dark. And like I think it's imperative that people be the change they want to see in the world. And yes, Nostr is difficult to use, but I think if you compare it to something like ham radio, it's incredibly easy to use, and it will just get easier to use over time.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's the motivation I needed as well. Every kind of like couple of weeks, I'm like, I really gotta like go on Nostr and get into it. So I'll have another push. All right, dude, I'm gonna start rounding things off because I know you've only got another kind of like 10, 15 minutes or so. There's one more thing that I want to ask you, and this is I have a friend called Mike, Parallel Mike. He's also a podcaster, and he is a real gold bug, loves his gold, but when it comes to Bitcoin, he's very, very skeptical of it. And I think his main criticism is this, and I've not actually put it to anyone before, so I'm just interested to know your thoughts on it. He thinks basically the algorithms, the cryptography behind it, it's all come from the NSA, and that they probably backdoored it. So like SHA-256 is backdoored. Even if, and I've kind of made this point, well, if that's backdoored, then, your usernames and passwords aren't safe, your banking details, possibly the nuclear codes or whatever. But he says, well, it came out of the NSA, and the NSA has a habit of backdooring these things. That's the history of things that we see come out of there. Can we know for sure it's not backdoored, or does he have a point there?
I think, first of all, the argument that like everything's fucked is like usually not that effective of an argument.
No,
people don't usually take that well. Also, like gold bugs like have always been kind of down that doomsday scenario where like, oh yeah, everything's fucked, but like I still got my gold in my garage. I think, first of all, that theory has gone, like I've been in Bitcoin for over 11 years now. I remember first reading about it back then. And I always thought it was like not that effective an argument because like probably the greatest adversary for Bitcoin would be the NSA. So like if for whatever reason, like the NSA has like massive skin in the game because they have like 1 million Bitcoin, whatever people speculate these coins are. Like at least like our interests are kind of aligned at this point, it's like if they wanted to kill it. But I mean, this is why it's important that Bitcoin is open source code, right? That anyone can verify the code, see how it works. And actually, people have this tendency to think Bitcoin is incredibly complex. But like the beauty of it is in its simplicity. And so if you're able to inspect the code, you can, you're able to trust the math without trusting any individual because you see how it's running and what is running. Now, if you're not, that is completely fine. That is the overwhelming majority of people. I think what happens is they learn to trust it over time. It takes time. And so like the way I look at it is like, some people I talked to about Bitcoin, friends and family 9 years ago, 10 years ago, and when it hasn't been destroyed by the NSA 6 years later, that's when they finally get it. It takes time. It takes time for them to realize like it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and it's still going and it's still happening. That's where the people start to come around. So I think a lot of this for most people is time. And I think that's also one of the reasons why this thing is happening gradually than suddenly. Like people just don't just like wake up in the morning and they're like, I can't verify this code and I'm just going to ape the fuck in. It just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. It's not backdoored and you can verify it yourself by looking at the code. And if you can't, then it's going to take time. But I will say that is the issue with hard forks, right? Is if we all have to run a new client, is that new client backdoored? And I did mention the hard fork that we have to do. There is a little bit of nuance in that because if we know there's a hard fork that we have to do ahead of time, like 10 clients, a decade before, 2 decades before, like we can start adding the changes, but they don't go into effect until a certain block height. And then if you do it that way, you still have some older clients that are backwards compatible, just like not all of them are backwards compatible. But there's the jury's out on that one. There's no
normally
not the jury. The jury's in on that one. There's no backdoor in Bitcoin. That's wrong.
Yeah, normally when I kind of talk about this, when people like mistrust the cryptography and stuff, like the analogy that I use is like we have concepts in maths called, things like I think it's called a mathematical trapdoor, where like in order to kind of get in order to get the product of two integers, it's like way more computationally less demanding than, for example, to have like the product and to try and find, one of its divisors or whatever. So like we have these concepts in maths that you can prove, which is that like there are one-way functions. And even though it kind of seems complex, these algorithms seem complex, it's all just kind of like building upon a basic mathematical principle. I mean, that's kind of all cryptography is. And unless you can kind of, when it comes to some of these algorithms, it's like, well, yeah, like it might have been created by the NSA, but you can still mathematically look at it and say, I know that the maths checks out. I know that it's more computationally difficult to get, this integer, to get, for example, like I know that I can't get the private key from the public key. Like I know that because it's based upon mathematical principles that are proven. So that's kind of always the way that I go. And there's some really good videos. I'm terrible at putting stuff in the notes, but if I remember, I will try and put a couple of videos in there which kind of like break down things like the mathematical trapdoor principle and stuff, which is kind of very useful to understand and be able to trust cryptography. So yeah, I'm totally with you, but I think it's, it's good to always, I guess just offer people some information about this who are skeptical about it, and also just to kind of remain adversarial ourselves. Like it's important to kind of revisit this. And I'm always asking, sometimes I'm asking questions like now that I was still asking in like 2016. I'm like, okay, like, is there anything more to it? Does AI change this? Does quantum computing change this? Like, it's important to kind of revisit it. But I'm totally with you there.
The whole point is like, you don't have to trust Satoshi, even if Satoshi was NSA.
Yeah.
If we had to trust the creator, we're fucked.
Yeah. All right, Odell, I'm gonna bring this out now. You've been super generous with your time. I appreciate you coming and having this conversation. There's stuff I didn't go into, but I think this is kind of a good place to round it off and stuff. Maybe we can go into some other topics another time in a future episode. I guess first of all, just let people know like where they can find you, everything you're up to, OpenSats as well. Oh, by the way, I switched the splits for the podcast. 100% is going to go to OpenSats. 100%. So anyone who is boosting this, I don't know how long I'll leave it on for, but I'll leave it as 100% for at least the next 2-3 episodes. So if anyone wants to boost this episode, then it will 100% of it will go to OpenSats. So please do that and support open source development. But yeah, I'll let you bring this one out, Odell. Let people know where they can find you and any parting words you have as well for my audience.
First of all, that's badass. Supporting OpenSats like that. I think that's really cool. Like we didn't talk about podcasting 2.0 at all, but it's really cool that podcasters can, first of all, receive money directly from their audience, but second of all, do splits. And in OpenSats case, because we're Bitcoin native, because we hold all of our funds in Bitcoin, because we run our own Bitcoin node, podcasters like Johnny are able to just easily add a split or add 100% to OpenSats, and that money doesn't ever, Johnny never takes custody of that money. It goes straight to OpenSats, which is really cool. First of all, thank you for having me. I consider you a friend. This was a long time coming. I appreciate our friendship. I'm happy to come on in the future. We can, make it more of a repeat thing.
Awesome.
Would be fucking awesome. And I enjoyed the conversation. Where to find me? Well, my podcast is called Scylla Dispatch, so you can search Scylla Dispatch in your favorite podcast app, or Rabbit Hole Recap, which is the weekly news one. All my links are at odell.xyz. And if you want to come follow along on Nostr, the easiest way to get started is primal.net/Odell is my profile page. And if you just go to primal.net, it'll let you download the apps for Android. It'll link you out to Android and iPhone apps.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'll put those links in the notes as well so people can go follow you there. But yeah, thanks again from me. This has been great, and I look forward to the next one.
Take care.